इससे मैंने मैडम अब तो कोरोना का भी बहुत कम हो गया मेरे टाइम से है और चलिए मैं आगे इतनी कब तक करना है।
नहीं, आपने बहुत अच्छा किया। मुझे अगर कभी थोड़ा सा भी अंदाजा होता ना कि आपका है तो मैं आपको बहुत पहले बुला लेती। हमें तो काफी दिनों से था। इवन ड्यूरिंग कोरोना ये लोग लेने को तैयार थे। मैंने बताया था ना इन लोगों के पास मेरे अपने पास आई हैव बीन स्ट्रगलिंग फॉर अ वेरी लॉन्ग टाइम। मैं तो अब जो है वो लिटरली वो जो कहते हैं ना इंसान तंग आ जाता है कि एक सिचुएशन से कि मतलब आप हफ्ते में I'm taking 6 classes a week. बहुत ज़्यादा। 1 class every day. Gross भी और embryology भी plus MCQs बनाने every alternate week सब स्टेज होती है। उसके लिए सारे 80 MCQs 40 का एक सेट 40 का एक सेट प्लस बहुत ज़्यादा बर्डन है मेरे ऊपर। सारी रात बैठे बैठे तो मेरे नमाज पढ़ के सोती। तो मैं तो अब जो है वे हैंड्स अप लिटरली करते हुए थे कि प्लीज बस इनफ इज इनफ। मैं आइदर गेट मी समबडी और क्योंकि वो एक्चुअली हमारे दो एक बच्चियां जो है वो छुट्टी पे गई और उनका आने का स्टेटस भी नहीं पता था कि आना है नहीं आना है क्या। सो मुझे पता होता मैं आपको पहले ही बुला रही थी। करना क्या था ऑनलाइन क्लासेस भी लेनी थी। तो आप घर बैठ के भी ले सकते हो आजकल। मगर उसमें सबसे अच्छी बात यह है कि आप साथ साथ बैठ के अपना थीसिस जी 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 क्योंकि आपकी प्रायोरिटी इस वक्त जो है जी जी मैम आपकी थीसिस है। उसको जितनी जल्दी वाइंड अप करोगे यहाँ से आपको फौरी तौर पे
मैम ये शुक्र है मैडम हम लोग साइंस का बाद में सारा करवा दिया टाइम से अभी इतनी लीव का गैप आ गया हम से लिख ही सकता हूं।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल ये बात तो है ना बेटा। सो यही मैं आपको समझाने की उसमें हूँ कि प्लीज इसको जो है ना आप बहुत सीरियसली टेक अप करेंगे।
अभी मैंने ऑनलाइन लेक्चर्स लिए हैं मैडम ने कुछ असाइन किए थे उस पे जूम।
ठीक है यहाँ भी जूम ही है
जी मैम उसमें मैंने किए थे मैडम ने ना डीपीटी एक्सेस किए थे।
हाँ
और मैं असाइनमेंट को जनरल वो मैंने कुछ 4 यूनिट कराए थे।
ठीक है
वो घर बैठे मैडम मुझे घर पे वहां से उससे उसका भी मुझे आइडिया हो जाता है कैसे बनाना है क्या करना है। पावर मैडम कैसे तो पहले सब पूरा पावर पॉइंट में क्योंकि इधर टीचिंग का कोई चल रहा है पावर पॉइंट पे आपने बना दिया जो स्ट्रक्चर आएगा आपका वो प्रैक्टिस करेगा तो जल्दी को अप्लाई करेगा।
ठीक है
बस ऐसे ही एमफिल वालों का सीखना
अच्छी बात है बेटा अच्छी बात है। मगर अच्छा मुझे ये बताओ कि स्टूडेंट्स को अदरवाइज फेस टू फेस आपने कितना पढ़ाया हुआ है क्लास को एज क्लास वहाँ साहिवाल में पढ़ाया हुआ है। वहाँ भी साहिवाल में जब आप पढ़ाते हो वालेकुम सलाम क्या हाल है बेटा। वहाँ पे जो आप पढ़ाते हो तो उनको पावर पॉइंट पे पढ़ाते हो या वैसे ही
वैसे पावर पॉइंट बहुत कम है कुछ लेक्चर जो यूज किए ज़्यादा मैं उनको डेमोंस्ट्रेशन
ठीक है सो यू हैव एन आइडिया अबाउट बोथ मोड्स ऑफ टीचिंग। मकसद तो ये था पूछने का
जैसे अटेंडेंस की वैसे
ठीक है सही है सही है बेटा। फाइन चलो ये तो बेटा बहुत अच्छा है। आप यहाँ खुश रहो हमारे पास। लेकिन बात वहीं पे ही है कि सबसे पहले आपने तवज्जो देनी है स्पेशली अब देखो ना इन्होंने अनाउंस किया है 15 सितंबर तक कॉलेज बंद रहेंगे। 15 सितंबर से खोलेंगे। सो अभी आपके पास तकरीबन से 2 महीने और जी तो इन 2 महीनों में आप जितना भी आगे काम बढ़ा सकते हो क्योंकि ऑब्वियसली फंसे हुए हैं कि आपके रिजल्ट्स आए तो आप उनको ऐड करो और
कुछ एक्सपेरिमेंट लगा मैंने सारा कंपाइल कर दिया।
हाँ बिल्कुल जब तक वो एक्सपेरिमेंट नहीं होगा
जी वो
कंप्लीट तो नहीं होगा। तो मैं आपको इसलिए ये उल्टे सीधे सवाल कर रही हूँ कि ये डॉक्टर कुर्सी ने पूछ रहे हैं जी जी सो यू हैव टू बी मेंटली प्रिपेयर्ड फॉर दिस। ठीक है तो मेरे से पूछ लीजिए इसका कहाँ तक पहुँचा है मैं इसलिए जो है ये बता रही हूँ। बाकी हमारे पास डिपार्टमेंट में एक लड़का और भी है माशाल्लाह इज अ डेमोन्स्ट्रेटर। वो पेशावर में हाँ है वो। वहाँ पे उसकी फैमिली है। यहाँ पे सुबह एज ए डेमोन्स्ट्रेटर और शाम को मेडिकल ऑफिसर डबल जॉब्स पे शामिल कर रहा है। जो भी बेटा किसी के हालात हो, बिकॉज मैं आपको इसीलिए बेटा पूछा था बिकॉज ही हैज अ फैमिली, ही हैज अ लिटिल डॉटर। ऑब्वियसली उनका कोई सवाल नहीं है जी करना है साफ और के एग्जाम भी वगैरह भी कर रहा है।
स्टडी के साथ रिलेटेड मैं भी
चलो अभी बात करते हैं। टाइम क्या हुआ? 10 बज गए। अच्छा जी, सो बेटा मुझे अनम्यूट किया है। सेकेंड ईयर का एमए टीम। अच्छा जी, चले बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अस्सलाम वालेकुम and a very good morning to all of you. A hot morning as usual, a humid morning. So the last thing that we did last time was the development of IELTS Act. And with that, we finished off with the development of the G. Thank you, my dear. A very good morning to you all as well. So how's the morning over there where you are? Humid, hot, या बारिश हो रही है? Good morning तो कहा है, तो बारिश वाली morning है या is it a humid morning like it is over here? Hot? Wow. चलो क्या हो सकता है? The weather is like that, beta. We have to wear this for another month or so. अच्छा जी, so we were doing we finished off. मुनीबा, बेटे, क्लास हो रही है। अच्छा जी, let's start with the congenital anomalies of the eye. अभी तो बाकी किधर है? सो रहे हैं? Just 69 of you. Okay, चलो, they'll get up in due course of time. Never mind. So, coloboma of the retina. Let's start with the anomalies in the retina. Okay, this is the optic cup. Okay, and I told you, optic cup inferior continued as the optic stalk. And within this optic stalk, you had these nerve fibers from the innermost layer of the retina. And they developed into the optic nerve. So optic stalk may you have the optic nerve. And I also told you that the opening in the optic cup continued into the optic stalk as a fissure. Now this fissure is called retinal fissure. This is called optic fissure, choroid fissure. Different books mention different names for it. What happens is that a gap may sometimes be left in the retina. This gap is usually found inferior to the optic disc. This gap is called coloboma of the retina. Usually, in fact, mostly bilateral. Coloboma of the retina mostly is bilateral, and it is due to defective closure of this fissure. Choroid fissure or optic fissure or retinal fissure. All these are the names given to one single structure, and which is this fissure, developing on the anterior aspect of the optic stalk. Now, similarly, you have this other defect, which is called coloboma of the iris. This is simply a keyhole type. The iris gives a keyhole type of appearance, like this. Okay, inferior sector जो है iris का, that is missing. So part of the iris missing at the inferior aspect of this structure. एक notch like appearance होती है pupil की. Okay. Generally, it is limited to the iris, but if more extensive, it may involve posteriorly. It may involve the ciliary body. It may even involve the retina. Once again, the defect is the same: failure of the retinal fissure to close. Retina. Retina, I told you, developed from the optic cup. This is the optic cup. Wait, जरा इसको लगाते हैं. Okay, fine. ये पीछे हैं sockets पर. इधर से आ जाओ, उधर से दूसरे से. अच्छा जी. So, thank you, my dear. Thank you so much. So this optic cup has two layers: an outer layer and an inner layer. The outer layer develops into the pigment epithelium of the retina, and the inner layer develops into the neural layer of the retina, in which the different neurons of the retina exist. Between the two layers, you have this intraretinal space. Okay? Normally, what happens is the two layers rapidly grow, approach each other, and fuse with each other, obliterating the intraretinal space like this. Okay, but if the two layers, if they fail to fuse, then a congenital detachment of the retina. I repeat once again, if the two layers, the outer pigment layer and the inner neuronal layer of the retina, the optic cup, they develop into the two layers of the retina. If these two layers fail to fuse, then congenital detachment of the retina may occur. This separation, congenital detachment, means the two layers are separated from each other. Okay. This separation, it may be an entirely, completely separation. That is rare. At times, itne hi same separation will be, or just this part may get separated, the rest is all infused. In the rest of the retina, the two layers are fused. That is more likely to be. So, partial or complete separation means that you have these two layers that may be partly, I'm so sorry, separated from each other, or completely, like you see over here. Okay, one of the reasons why you have congenital detachment of the retina is that these two layers, normally their rate of growth is such that this inner layer approaches the outer layer and the two fuse with each other. But if the rate of growth is unequal, this grows less, this grows at a normal pace, obviously then this layer will not approach the outer layer and it will not fuse. Okay? So unequal rate of growth in the two layers of retina. As a result, the two layers are not in perfect apposition, perfectly fused. Perfect fusion will not occur in these two layers. There is also something called a secondary detachment. Layers initially fuse kar gayi thi, but then later on, for some reason, they got separated. This inner layer of retina, the neuronal layer, this, if you remember, is supplied by the hyaloid artery, the central artery of the retina. So this retains its blood supply. So iski degeneration nahi hoti. Postnatally, what happens is, that is after birth, after the baby is born, these two layers are not very firm. So Retinal detachment is not something uncommon. Any blow to the eye, a fist fight, anything, head injury with a blow to the eye, with any damage to the eye, these two layers may get separated. When they get separated, obviously inflammation occurs. Inflammation results in edema, and this edema collects in the intraretinal space. That is why the patient comes up with blurring of vision, because there is fluid in the intraretinal space. Now remember one thing, outside this is mesenchyme. This mesenchyme will develop into choroid. We've already discussed that. Okay? The fusion between the pigment layer of the retina and the choroid, that is a very firm fusion that never separates. However, the fusion between the inner and outer layers of the optic cup, that is not firm, and the two layers, they separate out in whatever, be it a primary or a secondary retinal detachment. These two layers of the optic cup, they separate out. This is a very unsightly kind of picture. अब तो शायद ये आपकी किताब में से रिमूव कर दी गई है. In our days, this used to be a very scary kind of picture. This is called cyclopia and or synophthalmia, depending what happened. The eyes may be partially or completely fused with each other, resulting in a single midline eye. This is what it looks like. This single midline eye has a single orbit. Okay. This structure that you see over here, this is the nose. The nose is above the eye. This tubular kind of a nose above the eye is called proboscis. Cyclopia, this thing, this is a single eye. So just one midline eye developed. However, by synophthalmia, we mean that two eyes developed, but then they approached each other and they fused with each other. The orbits also fused with each other. So there's a single midline eye. I hope you can appreciate one thing, that this kind of a baby cannot survive. So this anomaly is not compatible with life. Besides, this anomaly is associated with other kind of developmental problems, especially problems of the developmental defects in the nervous system. In the nervous system, the midline structures of the brain, they do not develop properly. So there is defective development in the midline structures of the brain. This condition is called holoprosencephaly. Okay. So in holoprosencephaly, this is the structure that you see. This is not compatible with life. Macrophthalmia, a small eye. Look at the two sides. This was a picture taken from the internet. It's not given in your book, unfortunately. So this is a small eye, and this is the normal looking eye. The appearance may be normal, but this is very small in size. So what it may be, that this may be a rudimentary eye, a normal appearing but a rudimentary eye, or the structures inside the eye, they may not develop at all. Normally, they not develop normally. And with this, with a small eye, the face on this side may also be underdeveloped. The orbit may be small and so on. Maxilla may be smaller than usual. Besides, this may also be associated with other defects. The basic teaching in embryology is that if you see one congenital anomaly, please always look for other anomalies as well, because anomalies usually do not present alone. Okay. अब ये जो माइक्रोफ्थाल्मिया है, this may be a part of a syndrome. Trisomy 13 में माइक्रोफ्थाल्मिया usually होती है. Facial clefts में you see are associated with microphthalmia. Yeah. Okay. Now, what happens is any defects in the eye, any one of them, the ones that we've just talked about, and ones, also the ones that we are going to talk about. The extent or the severity of defect depends on the time the maldevelopment of that structure started off. For example, if maldevelopment starts at 4th week of development, the damage will be much more severe compared to any abnormality that starts to develop at 8th week. Because by 8th week, some structures have already developed. So whatever rest is left will result in an anomaly which is not very severe. But 4th week, when the eye starts to develop, so they say lens will not, and that is a big abnormality. If he kya ho jata hai. Okay? So the timing is very important because that determines the severity. 112 जाग पड़े. Wow. What is functional? This rudimentary, this eye, the small eye, microphthalmia? No, no. It is not functional. Isliye, because it is small, because it is rudimentary. And when it is rudimentary, that means the structures have not developed properly. The single eye. Single eye, beta, functional kya hona? The child doesn't survive. The child in the single eye, synophthalmia ki baat kar rahe hai na ye, cyclopia. In a single eye, the child does not survive. I told you, let me go back. Let me go back. Are you talking about this single eye? See, beta, is case mein, the child does not survive. It is not compatible with life. Then there's no point in this being functional or not functional. When the child does not survive, then kya karna hai? This is the nose lying above the eye. Uski anatomy kya hogi? This is what the oral fissure is. But in that case, there is no chance of the baby surviving. No chance at all. Okay? I thought you were talking about microphthalmia. Microphthalmia, maybe this is a rudimentary eye. The structures have not developed properly. That is why it is small. This is a normal looking eye. Isme, in early 4th week, the lens does not form. So if there is no lens, so and the eye is small, आप lens डाल भी नहीं सकते इसमें. So the vision is practically impossible. ठीक है? हाँ. If the development is arrested at 8th week, I just talked to you. In later developmental defects of 8th week or onwards, if that is the period when there is developmental arrest, when the development fails to occur or slows down, 8th week or after that, that is the time when the eye is small, but all the main structures have formed. So the abnormalities, whatever they develop, are minor. So in that case, vision is possible in this eye. So in later developmental defects, vision in this eye will be present, but in early defects, if it is 4th week or 5th or whatever, there will be no lens formation, and then vision in this eye will not be possible. अब ये होता क्यों है? It is either an inherited defect या फिर infectious agents हो सकते हैं, rubella में ये common है, और toxoplasmosis gondii. These are the usually two main. आपने जब किया था at the end of general embryology, so you remember the infectious agents. So one of them, rubella, creates a lot of problems. So does toxoplasmosis. This is a very unfortunate type of an anomaly. The child is born without eyes, anophthalmia. The eye does not form. Eye does not form means कि optic vesicle नहीं बना, optic cup ही नहीं बना, optic vesicle ही नहीं बना तो cup क्या बनेगा? So there is congenital absence of eye. Okay? The eyelids are present. Usually the eyelids are present, or in this case the eyelids be developing. Okay? But the eyeball is not present. This is the case with primary anophthalmia, in which the eyeball does not develop at all. Now, this is the case where in the 4th week of development, very early in the development fails to proceed. Bas, nahi bana. Okay? Arrest in development means development रुक जाती है, eye के development. So optic vesicle ही नहीं बना. Secondary anophthalmia जो होती है ना, that is because of secondary to the any defect in the forebrain. So developing nervous system का defect है basic defect. I told you earlier on, I developed from the forebrain, outgrowth from the forebrain. अगर forebrain नहीं develop करेगा बेटा, तो the eye will not develop. Okay? Okay. Congenital aniridia. That means iris does not develop. Iris. This is the iris. And if you remember correctly, iris developed simply as an extension of the cerebral body from the rim of the optic cup. This is the side. The optic cup से दो layers बनी थी, inner layer of retina, outer layer of retina, intraretinal space थी, ठीक है? ये inner layer थी, ये दो आपकी ganglionic cells की axons हैं, optic nerve. This is the neural layer, this is the pigment layer of retina. This is where the ciliary body is. This is the rim of the optic cup, the margin of the optic cup. This margin of the optic cup extends forwards as the iris. If this extension from the margin of the optic cup does not occur during the 8th week of development, then this condition, congenital aniridia, results. Obviously, there are going to be problems associated with the absence of iris. Glaucoma is one of them. Child will end up having glaucoma and other anomalies of the eye. If you remember correctly, which I know you don't, this developing lens was surrounded by mesenchyme. This mesenchyme posteriorly developed into tunica vasculosa lentis, and anteriorly this mesenchyme developed into iridopupillary membrane. And then when this hyaloid artery, when this degenerated, this tunica vasculosa lentis and the iridopupillary membrane, they also degenerated. This is what happens normally. But sometimes it so happens that remnants, part of this iridopupillary membrane or the entire iridopupillary membrane, it may persist. and it may look like a strand or anastomosing strands or web-like structure. They are made up of connective tissue and may result in the formation of vascular anastomosing cords, because this was basically blood vessels. Okay? The good thing is they hardly ever interfere with vision. So vision का problem नहीं होगा. It just they look unsightly, don't look nice. Degenerate कह जाते हैं on their own, but rarely the entire membrane may persist. That interferes with vision. और उसकी treatment बड़ी simple है, surgery, and that solves the problems. Actually, this is a drawing. This drawing is taken from the internet. बाकी सारी या KLM की है या Landman की है. So now we see the persistence of a hyaloid artery. Hyaloid artery, I told you, in the proximal part in the optic stalk, it persists. However, in the distal part in the optic cup, it will degenerate after a certain period. But if this distal part persists, then what do we have? We either have this thing, something, a worm-like structure, okay, or a moving blood vessel हो सकती है. These worm-like structures of blood vessels, they pass through the vitreous in this hyaloid canal. I told you the hyaloid artery degenerates, but the hyaloid canal persists and passes through the vitreous. So this blood vessel is seen as a strand traversing the hyaloid vitreous body. Things go wrong when this blood vessel may result in a cyst formation. That is when the patient comes to the doctor. Otherwise, this is since it does not interfere with vision, so this is an accidental finding. At times ये होता है कि because of this, since this is an anomaly, this may result in microphthalmia. But once again, it will not be a severe type. Congenital aphakia, that means lens fails to develop. अब आपको बताया था कि lens develops from surface ectoderm. This is the optic vesicle. This optic vesicle induces the overlying surface ectoderm to thicken and develop into a lens clay coat. If this lens clay coat does not form, the development of lens will not occur. So this occurs very early. That is, it takes place in the 4th week of development. 4th week में the lens starts to develop. और आपको बताया था कि when the developmental arrest is in the 4th week, then more severe anomalies occur, because now this is the optic vesicle. This lens then induces the optic vesicle to form as the optic cup. ठीक है जी? So the reason for this is that the optic vesicle does not induce the overlying ectoderm to develop into a lens clay coat. The child obviously will not be able to see from the affected side. Congenital glaucoma. ये देख लीजिए. This I think was given in your book, ALN की ये drawing. Glaucoma is simply a raised in the intraocular pressure. ये हम पहले कर चुके हैं gross anatomy की classes में. And the intraocular fluid जो होता है aqueous humor, that drains through the sinus venosus sclerae, or also called the canal of Schlemm. Any blockage in the canal of Schlemm Obviously, aqueous humor is being produced, but it is not being drained by the canal of phlegm. Reason: in these children, there is underdevelopment of the canal of phlegm, या जो भी drainage mechanisms है. Okay? So the aqueous humor is being produced normally, but it is not drained because there is abnormal development of the drainage system of the aqueous humor. As a result, intraocular tension rises. Okay? चलिए, intraocular tension rises, imbalance between production and outflow of aqueous humor, वो भी अभी बताया, and it may result from abnormal development of scleral sinus venosus. Sinus venosus, sclerae, also called canal of phlegm. Clinicians बहुत पसंद करते हैं इसको. Hopefully that finishes with the development of the eye. Okay, ये देख लीजिए. The lens is white. You can see a white lens. This is congenital cataract. Cataract present at the time of birth. Okay, it gives a grayish white appearance. If there is no treatment, blindness occurs. Causes सबसे बड़ा cause जो है ना, that is rubella. Yeah. उसके अलावा irradiation or congenital galactosemia, whatever. But the thing is, the biggest cause is rubella. Treatment, surgery. You remove this lens, put in an intraocular implant, case of the vessels, and the child will be able to see because all the other elements of the eye are normal. Okay, thank you. Before we wind up this part, do we have any questions? अभी मैं air की development start करती हूँ, फिक्र ना करो, छोड़ोगे तो नहीं. Any questions, बच्चे? सब कुछ समझ में आ गया? Okay, fine. आ गया है समझ के, बड़ी अच्छी. अच्छा, there is a question. Fine. जी. Yes, madam. शाम. अच्छा बच्चे, खैर तो सही. वाई में मैं जो है ना सारी आई के डेवलपमेंट पूछूंगी, कहता सबको समझ में आ गया. Fine. Let's go to the development of air. एयर की डेवलपमेंट. अच्छा, अब ऐसा है कि in KLM they do it the other way around. They do the internal air first. I will start with the external air, okay, because that's the easier part. So before we go any further, let us, rather, have you done special senses and physiology? कर रहे हो ना आजकल? See, Sham, beta, bolo. Special senses, have you done it in physiology? Physiology of special senses. Anybody? Have you finished or are you doing? Ma'am, start ki hai. Okay, fine, just started. You're doing the eye, you haven't done the ear. Okay, fine. I get it. Never mind. और हमें anatomy में भी air next week inshallah we'll do it. चलो जी. Beta, air has three parts. The external air, all this is the external air. The middle air, and then this is the internal air. You have a fairly good idea आप लोगों ने FSC या A levels या whatever you've done. The external layer includes this structure which is called the pinna. ठीक है? Okay. This is the external auditory meatus. Yeah. External auditory meatus. This is the external auditory meatus. Layman's term में ear canal कहते हैं इसको. Okay. This is the eardrum. The other name, the anatomical name for the eardrum is the tympanic membrane. So this is the tympanic membrane. I hope you appreciate one thing. The tympanic membrane forms a partition or a wall between the external auditory meatus outside and the middle ear cavity inside. I repeat once again. The eardrum, also called tympanic membrane, forms a partition or forms a wall between the external auditory meatus and the middle ear. Okay. So the external ear has three parts: the pinna, external auditory meatus, and the outer layer, external layer of the tympanic membrane. Obviously, if it's a wall, it's a partition, it has two sides, an outer side and an inner side. The outer side is lined by epithelium. The inner side is also lined by epithelium. Okay, so the outer layer, external layer of tympanic membrane is included in the external layer. Then comes this middle layer. Middle layer has these three bones: incus, malleus, and stapes. That stapes rests on the oval window. Okay, so this middle ear cavity with its three bones plus the inner layer of the tympanic membrane, all this is included in the middle ear. And then you have the internal ear. Here, this is the internal ear. Vestibulo-cochlear organ. ठीक है, ये cochlea है, ये semicircular canals है. This structure is for hearing and balance. Both the functions are performed by the vestibulo-cochlear organ. And this, please don't forget this thing. This is not a part of any of the three parts of the ear. But this is the structure eustachian tube. You've been discussing it for so long. This connects the middle ear cavity into the inferior meatus, into the nasopharynx. Eustachian tube opens into the nasopharynx, posterior wall of the nasopharynx. हमने बहुत दफा इसको discuss किया. Okay, so I go over it one more time because this is something very new to you. External ear, pinna, external auditory meatus, and the outer layer of the eardrum or the tympanic membrane. This is the tympanic membrane and the outer layer of the tympanic membrane. Middle ear cavity में we have the inner layer of the tympanic membrane and the three ossicles, incus, malleus, and stapes. इनकी development हम कर चुके हैं already. And then you have the internal ear, inner ear, whatever you want to call it. This includes this vestibulocochlear organ, which is associated with hearing and balance. Okay, let's do the development of orifice. I hope you remember your pharyngeal arches. And then in between the pharyngeal arches on the external surface, you had the pharyngeal clefts. Between the first and the second arch, you had the first cleft. Between the second and the third arch, you had the second cleft. These clefts were simple, groove or depressions which are lying by ectoderm. Okay. Now, during 5th and 6th weeks, what happens is during the 5th week, 3 mesenchymal proliferations, small structures, small elevations they appear in the first arch. First arch आपको पता है यहाँ पे ये mandibular arch है. So in that region you have the three elevations called auricular hillocks. Hillock is a small hill, छोटी सी पहाड़ी, ठीक है? Then 6th week में you have another 3 hillocks appearing in the second arch. So 3 hillocks appear in the first arch, 3 hillocks appear in the second arch, and they are appearing in a very sequential arrangement, plus they are appearing on either side of this first groove, your first cleft. Why do these hillocks appear? There is proliferation of mesenchyme in these 3 areas. Separately, there are proliferation of mesenchyme. Now, one more thing. I hope you remember one thing. When we did the pharyngeal apparatus, the pharyngeal arches, I hope you remember that the first pharyngeal arch was innervated by the trigeminal mandibular division of the trigeminal, and the second arch was innervated by the facial nerve, 7th cranial nerve. So the hillocks in the first arch around the cleft, first cleft, the hillocks in the first arch are going to be innervated by the mandibular, and these, the second arch, by the facial nerves. Then these hillocks, they fuse with each other, and we have the formation of this structure, which is called the auricle. Okay, so the first hillock, this one, this develops into the tragus. This second hillock, this one, yeah, second and third, yeah, either this is the concha over here, yeah, fourth है, ये helix में, ये antihelix इधर, ठीक है, ये this is the antitragus, sixth. So in a proper sequence, ये arrange होते हैं. Now, the thing to remember is, as I've shown you over here, the auricle, when it starts to develop, it is developing at the base of the neck, over here. Okay? But then, gradually, by the 7th month, these auricles shift cranially and come to life at their normal level. Now, part of the auricle is supplied by the first arch, the mandibular division of the 5th trigeminal nerve, which is the branch of the first arch. However, the facial key contribution in because part of it also develops in the second arch. So the contribution of the facial nerve to the auricle is practically non-existent. Very little contribution by the facial nerve. The only part of the second arch, the structures developing from the second arch, the cutaneous branches of the cervical plexus, rectus, occipital, and greater auricular. These are the 2 nerves that supply structures developing from the second arch. ये जो आपके 7th cranial nerve है ना, this supplies structures in the developing mastoid process and mastoid antrum, and of course parts of the auricle on 2 sides. So अभी तक तो हम पिन्ना कर रहे थे. Before I go any further, do you have any questions? Any questions, beta? Anything you want me to repeat from this here? Auricular hillock. Okay. अभी कर देती हूँ. Anything else? Anybody else? Pencil के अलावा? Okay, fine. I'll repeat the auricular hillox. Let me go back. This is the first cleft, right? On either side of the cleft, first cleft, let me show it over here. This is the first arch, this is the second arch. The two arches are separated on the outside by this first cleft, and on the inside, the two arches are separated by the first pouch. आपको बताया था the endoderm between the first and second arch. This projects inwards and forms the first pouch. The ectoderm between the first and second arches, this projects inwards and forms the first cleft. Now, the mesenchyme in this area where you see my cursor, this is the first cleft. So mesenchyme in the first arch around the cleft, and mesenchyme in the second arch around the cleft. This mesenchyme proliferates and forms three elevations. These three elevations are called hillocks. So you have three auricular hillocks. Okay? Three elevations produced by proliferation of mesenchyme around the first cleft. They are called auricular hillocks. Obviously, the first arch is supplied by the mandibular division of the trigeminal. So the hillocks formed in the first pharyngeal arch, they will be supplied by the mandibular nerve. And these hillocks in the second arch, they will be supplied by the seventh cranial nerve, that is facial. However, when finally the pinna is formed, there is contribution from the mandibular division, yes, but there is very little contribution from the facial nerve. The facial nerve mainly innervates the mastoid process and some part on the cranial surface of the sternal area, that is the pinna. अब इसके next उस पे आ जाते हैं. Am I clear? Okay, you're welcome, my dear. You're always welcome. Achha ji. So let's come to the external auditory meatus. I just told you the ectoderm invaginates and comes close to this first pouch. So the ectoderm invaginates and forms the first groove. The first groove comes in contact with the first pouch, and there is some mesenchyme lying in between the endoderm of the first pouch and the ectoderm of the first groove. या cleft, आप जो भी इसका नाम दे. This is a ectoderm lined depression. Okay. Now to begin with, this depression, this groove is shallow. This groove is the developing external auditory meatus. Yeah, air canal जिसको आप कहते हैं. So to begin with, this is shallow, and this is a solid structure full of proliferating ectodermal cells. This is the bottom of the groove, which is simply blocked by the proliferating ectodermal cells. This structure is called meatal plug because it is simply blocking the external auditory meatus. Because of this meatal plug, ये जो external auditory meatus is a shallow structure. It is not deep. Now, around 7th month, clefts begin to appear in this solid meatal plug. The central cells, they degenerate. So cells in the center degenerate, cells at the periphery, they persist. As a result, the external auditory meatus, which was up to here to begin with, now becomes deep. Okay? So this is how, when it gets deeper, it comes to lie in contact with the wall of the first pouch. So this is the definitive external auditory meatus. Now, ये हम already पहले कर चुके हैं. I'll just repeat everything. This is the first pouch, which is lined by endoderm. This is the first cleft, which is lined by ectoderm. As the cleft grows deeper, it comes in contact with the first pouch. The first cleft, yeah, first groove is lined by ectoderm. The first pouch is lined by endoderm. There is some mesenchyme in between. This surrounding mesenchyme is trapped in between these two layers. These hence become 3 layers. From the outside in, you have ectoderm, some mesenchyme, and the endoderm. These 3 structures develop into what is called a tympanic membrane. Okay? So ये जो outer first है, the ectoderm की जो layer है, this is lined by, since ectoderm है तो stratified squamous epithelium से lining होगी. Since this is endoderm, it will be lined by the simple cuboidal epithelium. और ये in between जो trapped mesenchyme है, this develops into collagen elastic fibers, etc. Nothing much. Is this in clear? Any questions? Your tympanic membrane, do we have any questions? This is just repetition, beta. We've already done this before. जब हमने किया था, pharyngeal apparatus किया था. I don't suppose there are any questions. Anyway. Okay. I will start with this, but just in 5 minutes time, I don't think we can make any headway in this, but let's start with this. Once again, you've done quite a bit of it. हमने इसको development of pharyngeal apparatus में बड़ी detail से पढ़ा था. Now we are talking about this structure. This structure is the first pharyngeal pouch. I told you the first endodermal lining of the first pharyngeal pouch. This endodermal lining, this pouch grows deeper, moves laterally, and approaches the first pharyngeal groove. In this, the surrounding mesenchyme, up is pouch. On either side of the pouch, you have the first arch and you have the second arch. In the first arch, if you remember, the dorsal end of the first arch, you had the development of the 2 ossicles, incus and malleus. Jabki second arch you had the development of the stapes. Okay? ये जो first pouch है, this extends laterally. This lateral extension remains narrow over here, but towards the lateral side, it dilates. Sorry. This first pouch, the portion that is connected to the extension of the first pouch in your back body. This extension, which is connected to the developing pharynx, this remains narrow, but the distal end dilates. This develops into the tympanic cavity. To begin with, we call it tubo-tympanic recess. और ये जो proximal part है, which is narrow, ये part. This proximal narrow part is later going to develop into the auditory tube. So I hope you remember one thing. We talked about the auditory tube. And I told you the auditory tube opens into the nasopharynx. So that is what it explains. This narrowed part of the first pouch. This develops into the auditory tube and it opens into the developing pharynx. The dilated distal part develops into tympanic cavity. Okay. Abhi tak, do we have any questions? Development of middle layer. Abhi tak jo pada. Tympanic cavity, how is it formed? Tubo-tympanic recess. Is it clear? मिडिल लेयर रिपीट कर दूं? ओके फाइन, थैंक यू गौहर. मैं सोच ही रही थी आज आपने कोई सवाल नहीं किया. मैं इसको रिपीट कर देती हूँ. Beta, this is the first pharyngeal pouch. आपको बताया था. The first pouch is simply an extension of the endoderm of the developing pharynx. The extension between the first and the second arch. The first and the second arch, they are separated by this extension of the first pharyngeal pouch. This first pharyngeal pouch extends laterally. Rabi हमने बताया था कि they comes in contact with the first groove, and this is where the tubo-tympanic recess is going. This is where the tympanic membrane is going to develop. So we were talking about the lateral extension of the first pouch. This extension close to the pharynx, this extension of the first pouch, this remains narrow, but the distal part of the pouch, this gets expanded. This narrow part of the pouch develops into auditory tube. Over here we have the pharynx. This is the narrow part of the pouch that will develop into the auditory tube. This is the distal dilated part of the pouch. This will develop into the tympanic cavity, also called the middle ear cavity. Middle ear cavity is the same as tympanic cavity. Okay? So I hope you appreciate now that this
मैम लेक्चर का टाइम खत्म हो गया.
Okay, fine. Thank you. God bless you.
वेलकम मैम. वेलकम.